They were just children, yet their small hands carried the weight of death. In the dust of war, under the crack of whips and the roar of gunfire, one boy dared to dream of something bigger than survival. This is not just a story about war, it's about chains that could be broken, hope that refused to die, and a choice that would change everything. Stay with me, because by the time you hear the last words, you will never see freedom the same way again. The first sound of the morning was the iron bell, deep, hollow, and cruel in its timing. It tore through the thin veil of sleep that had clung to Kofi's mind, wrenching him back to the waking world where pain waited like a patient enemy. A boot prodded his ribs. "Up, boy." Kofi's eyes blinked open in the dimness of the slave quarters. The air was thick with the smell of sweat and damp earth. Beside him, another child, Jacob, just 9 years old, struggled to sit up, his face pale in the meager light. The chains on their ankles rasped against the packed dirt floor as they moved, a sound so constant it had become part of the air they breathed. Outside, the sky was still ink black, the horizon just beginning to bleed faint purple. The overseer stood at the doorway, whip coiled loosely in his hand, tapping it against his thigh in a slow, menacing rhythm. The line of children shuffled past him into the cold dawn, their bare feet crunching on gravel. The plantation stretched out before them, rows upon rows of cotton and tobacco, ghostly in the early light. Beyond the fields, a storage yard loomed, stacked high with wooden crates stamped with military markings. This was where Kofi's labor began. The first crate was heavier than it looked. He could feel the musket balls shift inside as he lifted it, each one cold and unfeeling. The wood bit into his palms, reopening old blisters. He kept his eyes low, focusing on each step toward the waiting cart. "Faster!" The overseer's voice cracked like the whip itself. Kofi stumbled forward, his stomach twisted from hunger. He hadn't eaten since the watery cornmeal they'd been given 2 days before. His vision blurred for a moment, and in that haze he saw a sparrow hop along the fence post. Its feathers caught the light of the rising sun, tiny jewels of brown and gold. He let his eyes linger a heartbeat too long. The whip snapped in the air behind him. "Eyes on the work, boy!" He forced himself to move, setting the crate onto the cart with a dull thud. All around him, other children worked in silence, the air filled with the scrape of wood, the grunt of strain, and the occasional cruel bark of an overseer's order. From the veranda, the master watched. Mr. Beauregard was a tall man, with a thick mustache and a pipe clutched between his teeth. His eyes swept the yard with an indifference that made Kofi feel less than an animal. Hours passed. The sun climbed, burning the mist from the fields, until every breath felt like inhaling dust and heat. By the time Kofi reached his 15th crate, his arms trembled violently. His grip failed. The crate slipped from his hands. It hit the ground with a crash that split the yard into silence. Kofi froze. The musket balls inside rolled and clinked against the boards. He dared a glance toward the veranda. Mr. Beauregard had stopped smoking. His gaze locked on Kofi, and in that still moment the boy knew the day's punishment would come when the sun was gone. The sun bled out across the horizon, staining the fields in shades of molten red and shadow. The day's heat still clung to the earth, rising in faint waves, but the air carried something colder now, the stillness that came before pain. 2 overseers dragged Kofi across the yard. His feet scraped the packed dirt, raising tiny clouds of dust. The others had already retreated to the quarters, their eyes fixed on the ground. Nobody wanted to witness what was about to happen, but everyone would hear it. The punishment post stood in the center of the yard, a rough wooden beam darkened by years of blood and sweat. The ropey bindings hung from it like a noose waiting for a neck. Mr. Beauregard stepped down from the veranda. Each boot step crunched against the gravel in slow, deliberate beats. He set his coat aside on a chair, rolled up his sleeves with a precision that was almost polite, and took the whip from the overseer's hands. The whip was thick, braided leather, ending in a tip of hammered metal. It glistened faintly in the last light of day. "You dropped a crate," Beauregard said, his voice smooth as if discussing the weather. "A man at war can't afford a weak link in his chain." Kofi kept his head low. He didn't speak, not because he was brave, but because words would only make it worse. "Bind him," Beauregard ordered. The overseers pulled Kofi's arms forward, wrapping the coarse rope tight until it bit into his wrists. His bare back faced the yard, the thin shirt already stripped away. The first lash landed before he could brace himself, a burning ribbon that tore skin and muscle in a single motion. He gasped, more from shock than pain, but the second strike stole the air from his lungs. The third made his knees buckle. The overseer's voice counted them out loud. 3, 4, 5, as if tallying grain sacks. By the 10th, Kofi's vision blurred at the edges. The whip's tip left trails of blood that slid down his ribs, warm against the cooling night air. In the haze, he heard his mother's voice, a soft lullaby from another life sung under palm trees by a river that no longer existed for him. He saw his father's broad smile as they carved wood together, the smell of fresh shavings in the air. But the whip yanked him back to the present with each strike. 15, the overseer announced. Beauregard lowered his arm, the whip hanging limp now, dripping red at the tip. "Let that be a lesson," the master said, his tone almost bored. They cut the ropes. Kofi fell forward onto his knees, the dirt clinging to his blood. A shadow moved beside him, Mama Ruth, the scarred woman who had seen too many nights like this. She knelt quickly, sliding her arm under him and pulling him to his feet before the overseers could bark at her. In the dim light, she whispered so only he could hear. "Hold on, child. This world is bigger than his land. One day you'll see it." Kofi didn't answer. His throat was raw, his body trembling, but her words clung to him as they stumbled back toward the quarters. That night he slept on his stomach, the thin blanket scratching against his torn skin. But before sleep took him, he saw the sparrow again in his mind, small, free, untouched by the whip, and he wondered if it had flown far beyond the fields. Morning came too soon, dragging Kofi back to the world with its dull gray light. His back throbbed in time with his heartbeat. Each movement sent sharp bursts of pain through his ribs. He didn't have the luxury of rest. Not here, not ever. The overseer's voice sliced through the air. "Move out! Work don't wait for no one!" Kofi joined the slow-moving line of bodies heading for the fields. The dew clung to his bare feet, cool and sharp against skin that had only known dust the day before. Above them, the sun was already a pale coin in the sky, promising another day of heat and thirst. The plantation seemed endless. Row upon row of cotton and tobacco stretched toward the horizon, their leaves stirring faintly in a breeze that never seemed to reach the workers. The overseers rode on horseback between the lines, scanning for any hint of slowing hands or straightened backs. Today, Kofi was not sent into the rows. His orders were to the ammunition yard, a fenced-off corner of the property where the work was heavier and the air tasted of metal and powder. Here, crates were packed tight with musket balls, gunpowder kegs, and strips of cloth for cartridges. The crates were marked with stenciled letters, CSA, Confederate States Army. Kofi didn't know the full meaning, but he knew these boxes were bound for soldiers, for killing, for the war that was creeping closer and closer. He lifted the first crate, feeling the weight pull at his arms, his legs straining to keep balance. The cuts on his back stung with every shift of his shoulders. He kept his eyes low, on the ground, one step after another. The hours blurred, the heat grew heavier, pressing down like a hand on his skull. His lips cracked. When he swallowed, it felt like swallowing glass. In the distance, thin black smoke rose against the blue, not from the fields, but from somewhere farther, beyond the hills. The muffled thunder of cannon fire followed moments later, a sound so deep it seemed to vibrate in his chest. During the midday break, the slaves squatted in the shade of the fence, sipping at tin cups of tepid water. Two older men, Samuel and Isaac, whispered to each other, their voices low. "They say if the north wins," Samuel murmured, "they'll set us free. All of us." Isaac's face was tight. "And what if they lose?" Samuel didn't answer. Kofi sat apart, pretending not to hear, but the words burrowed into his mind. Free. The idea was dangerous. It was a flame that could burn you worse than any whip if it was false. When the break ended, he returned to his work. Yet the thought stayed with him, a small ember inside. As he set another crate into the wagon, he glanced toward the distant smoke and wondered what kind of world might lie beyond it and whether he would ever see it. The night after the smoke rose on the horizon, Kofi's body gave out. It started with a shiver that no blanket could chase away. His skin burned, his breath came quick, and every movement sent heat rolling through his veins.